Well, morning folks, welcome to the Old Classic Car channel. Now today I am quite excited, actually very excited, because there is a new arrival due. There is a new old car due to arrive later to the Menagerie of Motoring Misfits here at Old Classic Car. Now, as any long-termers will know, this has been a bit of the plan for a while now, ever since I talked about letting the pre-war Morris Minor project, which was with us for 15 years I think, and also the Ford Anglia, which was with us for about 2.5 years, and that went a week or so back. So the idea was, as you probably know, let those two go and replace them with something a little larger, a little more capable of longer trips. Now this is all a bit rushed. I wasn't expecting the car to arrive today, so I have with me my period clipboard of confusion, and this will just remind me to cover all the things I want to cover in this short video. There will be a proper video about this new arrival following on fairly soon, once I've got my head around it and figured it all out and worked out how everything works. But this really is just to introduce this new old car that was arriving here at Old Classic Car in just a couple of hours time. So this is all a bit mad. I've been making space, moving the MX-5 out and everything, getting the space ready for this new arrival. It's a fairly sunny day at the moment, so hopefully that will continue. But to begin this particular video, I thought, rather than talk about what the car is, I thought I would talk rather about what the car isn't, i.e. some of the cars we've considered and rejected for whatever reason over the last few weeks of looking through the classifieds online. Now the criteria is something like this. Like I say, I wanted something with a reasonably sized engine. The idea being that the car will cruise along happily at 40 or 50 miles an hour, something like that, which isn't super fast. But if you've got a small engine car, like the little Renault here, when you're doing 45, 50 miles an hour, you certainly know you're doing it. So I'd rather have a larger engine car that's working much less hard, and then everything is unstressed and it's just lolloping along quite happily. So the idea is to have a car that's quite happy on reasonably brisk A roads. I did think about something that would also be suitable for motorways for longer trips, but thinking about it, am I really that comfortable with taking a classic car out on the motorway, given that so many motorways now don't have hard shoulders, or at least permanent hard shoulders on the side of the motorway, so if you have a problem you've got somewhere safe to pull over. Many of the smart motorways have done away with those now, at least on a full-time permanent basis, and I'm not entirely comfortable about taking an old car on the motorway. So that the motorway thing has kind of been parked, and because of that it did open up the options a little bit, maybe to go a little bit older than perhaps I was thinking before. Another consideration was I wanted something with decent spares support. I've had vehicles in the past, as you probably know, where the spares situation is less than good, and I wanted something where if I needed something to buy, I can just pick the phone up and I've got an option of people who will sell these parts in this country, rather than having to go to Australia or America and order the parts there and wait months for them to arrive, and they might not even arrive. So if you've got suppliers in this country, that is a big benefit in my book. So that was one of the considerations. I wanted something in decent condition to begin with, because like I say, I'm moving away from having resto projects and barn finds around the place to have fewer things that kind of work, leaving just the A40 as a project. Everything else is just a case, hopefully, of just keeping them running, servicing, keeping them ticking over and dealing with any problems as and when they arise. But I only want one full-on project car, which is the little 1960 Austin, hence the Morris Minor going, and the Anglia not far behind it. I also wanted to buy something that's had recent use, because if you buy a car that's been out of use for a few years, then you get into all sorts of problems when you start waking these cars up again, especially if the car's got hydraulic brakes. So really I wanted to buy something that's had recent use and also recent expenditure, evidence that a lot of parts, a lot of work has been done on the car, and hopefully that will reduce the amount of things that need doing going forwards into the sort of the near to medium term going forward. So that was something that's been on the road, in use, regularly maintained, and it's got some documents to back up the fact that it has been used and looked after in recent times. I also wanted something quite characterful and something different, and those two sort of considerations did influence quite largely the list of vehicles that we considered but rejected for whatever reason, and I'll get onto that in a moment. And finally, I wanted a saloon and at least 4 seats. So that kind of gives you an idea of the criteria for the car that we were looking to buy. And let's have a look at the list now of the vehicles that we thought about but didn't actually go and pursue. Okie dokie, right, some of the cars that made it onto the short list, but no further than that. I'm going to begin the list with the Sunbeam Talbot 90. Now, having a bit of a read around, they seem to have quite a good reputation. They've got about 2.2 something litre engine, 4-cylinder engine, mostly column shift, and they date to the 1950s. And I thought, well, as I part the motorway cruiser idea, like I say, it just opens up a few more options. And I did have a good close look at a couple of Sunbeam Talbots that were advertised online. Nice pale blue one, but when you look closely at the photographs, the sills and also the bottom of the front wings just looked a little bit wavy, as if maybe something had been going on there, perhaps a bit of indifferent welding or repairs in the past at some point, or maybe it had been jacked up not quite right. So that one was kind of discounted, plus the price was a little bit top heavy, I think, for what that was. There was another, well, probably still is, another Sunbeam Talbot, a two-tone green one, which I also like the look of. That looked like a very straight car indeed. Apart from the grille, I'm sure the grille had some bends on the vertical bars of the grille. And I did email the seller and I said, is it just a photograph, or are there some bends, a bit of distortion in the bars on the grille? And he came back and said, as far as I know, there are no problems with it at all. But the more I looked at the photographs, the more convinced I was that the grille bars were a little bit bent. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world, because just over there is actually another grille, but I'm not quite sure if the grilles changed between the 80 and the 90, and then what became the Sunbeam Mark III, which was the last of the Sunbeam Talbot 90s, if I remember right. So I wasn't quite sure, and I thought, well, you know, that kind of just put me off a little bit. So we discounted the Sunbeam Talbot 90 from the list. Next up, various Rovers. I did look back as far as the pre-war years, because I do like pre-war cars. The Rover P2, that was an option. I do like those, especially the sports saloons. P4s, again, someone else recommended that in the comments under a previous video, perhaps the Anglia leaving video. And I do like P4s. Although you do tend to see a few of them at every show we go to, and I was kind of looking for something just a little bit more unusual, perhaps, than the P4, because they do survive still in quite good numbers, which is a great thing, of course. You know, they're great cars. If you saw the video I did at one of the Woodford, the Avro Heritage meets, where I interviewed the owner of a lovely green P4, you'll see that I do really rate those cars, and I have no problem with them at all, but I'm just not quite sure if it was the car for me. Another car on the list, or rather manufacturer, was Volvo. Amazons, I had a look at a few Amazons, although they seem to be getting quite expensive, and when you look at the photographs closely, things aren't always quite maybe as you want, and they're north of £10,000 now for a decent Amazon. And I mean, I remember the days when you could buy an Amazon project car at least for like 50 quid. I mean, I bought 3 at different occasions for £50 each, and okay, they needed work, but you know, to see them north of £10,000-12,000 now does seem a little bit strong. And I thought, well, for that kind of money I could probably get something a little bit more unusual, still with decent spare support. And I've had Amazons in the past, so I kind of didn't really want to go back to that, although I did wonder about an Amazon estate. Volvo PVs, that was another consideration. There is a very interesting PV that's up for sale at the moment, and that's got a Rover 3.5 litre V8 engine in it. And I'm not totally against modified classic cars, you know, especially if the conversion is the engine is kind of in period with the car that the engine has been shoehorned into. But the problem with conversions is quite often it can compromise just how easy those cars are to work on. And when I looked at it, it was quite a neat installation behind the Volvo, beneath the Volvo's bonnet. But I did wonder about getting it, maybe some of the ancillaries, and if you get to the point where you maybe have to lift the engine out just to get at, say, the starter motor or something like that, then it can all get a bit tedious. So that was crossed off the list fairly quickly. But I do still love the Volvo PVs. I think they're a great looking car, and they drive really well. What else have we got? Mercedes 108. Now, at the time when I was thinking about motorway cruiser, I had a look adverts for the W108 series Mercedes of the late 60s and the early 70s, like the forerunners of the S-types, really, the S-Class. And I thought they're actually really beautifully built, beautifully put together cars. And I did have a very close look at photographs and an advert for one. It may still even be up somewhere online, I'm not quite sure. The only thing that put me off was it was the 280 SE, which is the fuel-injected car. And if you remember, I did actually have a Volvo 164E 2 or 3 years back, something like that. And the added complication of fuel injection, which the SE Mercedes are fitted with as standard. That kind of put me off a bit as well. It's a Bosch system, a Bosch D-Jetronic. It's a mechanical fuel injection system, which compared to more modern cars is actually fairly simple. But every time I read about the sort of the added complexity compared to a carburettor that fuel injection introduces, that kind of put me off a little bit as well, I must admit. The parts, if you can find them, are very expensive and they're not everywhere. So, beautiful a car as it was, I had to discount that one. To be honest, if it had been on carburettor or carburettors, that car would probably be here already. But the fuel injection thing just didn't make me wonder a little bit, because I like to keep things simple, especially with the old cars. You know, I just like to I like things that I kind of understand, and despite rereading the documentation about this fuel injection, I still couldn't really get my head around it, and I didn't really want to get into that level of complexity. So that was the W108 Mercedes, the 280 SE, crossed off the list. What's next? Yeah, the S-Type Jaguar. There's a very nice one of those up for sale at the moment, a dark green example. And I was quite tempted with that as well, but I've had Jaguars in the past and I know they can be quite complicated cars to keep them running right. So again, I parked that idea as well, but it was a lovely, lovely looking car, and compared to a Mark II, it was probably about half the price of a Mark II in comparable condition, so it was a really, really good buy for someone, but I just decided that it probably wasn't quite the car for me. What else have we got? Triumph 2000, I've seen a couple of nice ones of those for sale and I was quite tempted. But yeah, I just wasn't quite sure if I could get that excited. As much as I like them, and I love the engine sound of the 6-cylinder engine in the 2000s and the 2.5s, I just wasn't quite sure. I do quite like the Mark 1s. The Mark 2s, I'm not quite as sold on. Great cars as they are, capable, great daily user car as they are, I just wasn't quite sure if it's what I wanted, and quite old enough just to be what I want to have here to tinker with in the garage here at OCC HQ. So I kind of discounted the Triumph 2000 idea, same with the Rover P6 as well. The Vauxhall Velox E, now I did see a really nice one of those for sale, pale blue one, just a couple of weeks back actually, really nice, and being a Velox, it was a 6-cylinder E-series car of the mid-1950s, and I thought that would roll along quite nicely. I dropped the owner a line and asked a couple of questions about it, and then it was all a little bit vague. It came back and he said, oh, I found a couple of things I'm not happy with, so I'm going to withdraw the advert and I'll re-advertise it next year. So I thought, well, either he's not very keen on selling it, or maybe there's something else slightly not quite clear with the advert. So I thought, okay, we'll discount that one. And anyway, the advert was swiftly removed anyway after I made the inquiry, so that sealed that one, sealed the fate of that particular idea. But I do like the E-Series Vauxhall Veloxes and the Crestas. I think that would make for a really good car, and 4 doors, 4 seats, plenty of room for us, and picnic gear and all that kind of thing for going to shows, as we tend to do quite regularly throughout the year, as you will have probably noticed. And last on the list, the Humber Hawk, same kind of thing. I do quite like them, they're nice cars. I like the mid-1950s Humber Hawks, and then as they get a bit bigger and a bit larger and they go to the twin headlights either side, sort of my interest, my enthusiasm to actually own one begins to wane. Don't get me wrong, I love all these cars and I love to see these cars and talk to the owners and everything, but ownership is a slightly different thing, and my interests have always been a bit sort of pre-war-ish and so on, and that's kind of the way I've been looking. Do I get something pre-war or do I get something post-war? And that's kind of the time frame which I've been looking in, and that's kind of what guided us to pick the car that we have actually chosen, which will be arriving here not too much later today. So I'm getting very, very excited about this, and I'm rushing this video a little bit, I know, because I just want to get this out and ready and recorded prior to the arrival of this new old car. Right, okay, so that was the list of cars that we discounted, leaving just the one car that we ended up buying. We went to go and see it last weekend. Today is Tuesday. We went to go and see it on Saturday, agreed a price, shook hands on it, and there we go. And I was advised last night that it's on its way today, so that's really, really exciting. I can't wait to see it here, and I'm looking forward to doing a little clip of it arriving so that you can see what it is we've ended up buying. Like I say, I'll do a proper full walk around video of this particular car a little bit afterwards, but this really is just to sort of introduce what it is we've ended up buying. And is it the perfect classic car for me after all this searching and all this hunting? Who knows? There's only one way to find out, and that is to actually run it a little while. Now what I thought I'd do is I'd give you a few clues as to what it is and see if you can guess what the car might actually be. Now I found an article here on the clipboard of confusion, which I've printed off, and it was written by Brian Sewell, who was an art critic quite a few years ago. He's no longer with us, sadly, but he was an art critic, very outspoken art critic, and also a bit of a motoring enthusiast as well. And he wrote this article. It's a two-pager about this particular car, looking back at this particular car and what he thought of it. I won't read the whole thing, don't worry, but I'll just read out a few of the excerpts from it and see if you can guess what car it is he is actually referring to. Right, here we go then. So, he talks quite a lot about the engine. The engine actually can trace its roots back to the pre-war years, and this is an evolution of that particular engine. He's quite complimentary about it. It started out with a single carburettor and developed around 65 brake horsepower. This was pre-war, and it was ideal for amateur tuning and became a power plant of choice in road racing and hot rodding circles. We've got a bit more information here. And it was modified and installed into the the car that we are looking at. An engaging family saloon adored by spivs and spotty schoolboys. So what car do you think that might be? By this point in time, the engine, an evolution of the earlier engine from the pre-war years, was developing. I think it's about 85 brake horsepower, something like that. And 5 of these were exhibited at the first post-war London Motor Show. So that was the motor show held at Earl's Court in 1948, and there is actually a catalogue for that up in my office, which I will dig out. So yeah, exhibited, introduced to the public in 1948 here in the UK. Now, is it a British car? Because ideally I was looking for a British car. So is this a British car, or is it from further afield? See if you can work it out. Power by then, 1948. The car I'm buying is 1950, but it's almost identical, I think, to the 1948 cars. Power by then had risen to 85 brake horsepower at 3,800 revs per minute. Still a side valve engine, and still fed by a single carburetor. The reliability was beyond question, which is music to my ears. During the war, the earlier versions of this engine had been the workhorse of staff cars and Bren gun carriers. So maybe that's giving you a few clues as to where the engine of this particular car can trace its roots back to. The car itself also had successes in the Monte Carlo Rally, apparently. Now, just a little bit further on the article. Lazy, flexible, forgiving, the engine was mated to a 3-speed gearbox with synchromesh only on the upper ratios, but this hardly mattered, for the car was marketed as a truly top gear car, unbaffled by the steepest hills, unruffled by slow traffic speeds. In looks, now this might help you, in looks it was chubby, chunky, bunterish, well capable of seating 6 on its bench seats within the 9-foot wheelbase, though its overall length was only that of a Ford Focus Estate. So it's not a huge car, it's roomy, but not enormous. So that probably discounts quite a few American cars of the era that I'm interested in, sort of late 30s through to the late 40s and the beginning of the 1950s. What else do we say? The cabin was essentially the saloon of the late 1930s, i.e. based on the pre-war car. With 4 wide doors on forward hinges, then unusual, but the nose was longer than before and fronted by an imposing upright radiator cowl. So there we go, there may be a bit of a clue for you as to what car we are talking about here. We've got a bit more information here. And the was phased out in 1951, a year after its victories. The Tulip and the Lisbon rallies, not the Monte Carlo. The Tulip and the Lisbon rallies. And only 22,255 had been built in a 4-year span, a level of production no better than Rover and Humber, much smaller and old-fashioned firms. So really the car didn't sell in great numbers. It kind of was a bit of an interim model, as you'll find out as we go a little bit further on. Typically these cars, though cars of this make, were associated with interiors of painted tin and ghastly leatherette. And for the dashboard of the they boasted a new style plastic instrument panel of striking design in walnut grain. So what could that be? But for £36 more than the £585 asked for the basic, the deluxe saloon could have leather upholstery, a radio, 2 loudspeakers and a built-in aerial. Even the basic car Came with built-in hydraulic jacks, heater, demister rear blind, and an opening windscreen, all then regarded as luxuries. The also had the now neglected comfort of an almost flat floor and the despised convenience of a gear change lever on the steering column. So, column gear change, maybe that's a clue. Where are we? At £585, it was absurdly cheap for a car that could exceed 60 miles an hour. In fact, they would creep over 80 if you were patient enough. Cruise comfortably at a mile a minute and blast away from traffic lights with an endearing roar. So, are we getting any ideas yet? Have you got this one? Let me know in the comments if you guessed right. If you're watching this and you think, ooh, I wonder if it's a such and such. Let me know if you were right and what you thought. Or indeed, let me know what you thought it was, even if it wasn't the right guess. That'd be quite interesting to know, actually. And yet keep 20 miles per gallon within its reach. In all these points it was superior to the Humber Hawk and the Rover 16. The one, an underpowered lemon of a car for £695, i.e. the Humber, and the other at £735, too reticent for its own good. The Rover 16 is talking about. But both of those two had genuine timber dashboards and far better status in gentlemanly circles. So this was obviously a bit of a bounder's car, as opposed to the royalty of Humbers and Rovers, that sort of stature of vehicle. This didn't really belong in that class, according to many people at the time. Even Autocar magazine, Autocar, grudgingly dubbed the blah 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 a hefty and valuable knockabout machine. But it was a great deal better than that, according to Mr. Sewell, writing this article. Now rare, it can occasionally be seen in prestige auctions in its original liveries of dreary black and drearier beige, another consequence of post-war shortages, or as an almost coach-built woody shooting brake. And I do believe the royal family here in the UK, I believe they still have a woody shooting brake version of this car. I think it's parked or stored at Sandringham, I read somewhere. So clearly they were popular in royal circles as well, so they can't be all bad. Solid as a rock and equipped with an engine that is one of the all-time greats, quote, of motoring history. And that were just a few excerpts from this article written by Brian Sewell, presumably a few years ago, because he hasn't been with us for several years now. So what car is it? What car am I waiting for eagerly with bated breath here this morning? What is going to arrive on the driveway and add to our menagerie of motoring misfits? Well, it's still dry and sunny out here, so how's it going with the guesswork then, folks? Maybe a couple of extra clues are in order. The car dates to 1950, and it is a British car, a British four-door saloon, but it owes much to pre-war America. That much I will say. The engines were used in a variety of cars, including some post-war British sports cars, which were very successful in hill climbing. So that may give you a bit of a clue as to the engine, and then the car that this particular engine is fitted in. So maybe that'll help a little bit. Yeah, and it's about 3.6 litres, I believe, give or take a few cc here and there. And yeah, and we do have an engine of this configuration. It's not your regular four-cylinder inline four, and we do own a car with this layout of engine, but more than that I probably won't say right now. It should only be another hour or so before it gets here, so I'm getting even more excited than I was before. Dum-dum-de-dum. No prizes for guessing whose birthday it was recently. So the answer to the question of what car have we bought now, the answer is 3, 2, 1. 1950 Ford V8 Pilot. So there we go, all unloaded. I'm just going to wash off some of the muddy splots on the front and then pop her away once she's dried off. Like I say, I'll do a proper full video, proper walk around on this one very, very soon. So thanks very much for watching. Please keep an eye out on the channel for future updates regarding this Ford V8 Pilot from 1950.